Today, Sunday, marks 100 days since the U.S. president joined Israel in launching military action against Iran. You might have noticed since then, Donald Trump has repeatedly suggested one thing.
We're very close to making a deal.
It's very possible that we'll make a deal. We can make a good deal right now.
But the fighting, of course, continues, and more countries are being dragged into the fray. Despite a ceasefire agreed on April 8th, drones and missiles continue to be fired at and from Iran, resulting in thousands of deaths and injuries across the region. Joining me now to discuss the first 100 days of this war is Simon Mabon. He's professor of international politics in the School of Global Affairs at UK's Lancaster University. Simon, greetings. 100 days into this war, it was supposed to be a quick victory for the U.S. and Israel. Instead, it has spread, causing thousands of deaths and injuries across several countries in the region. How predictable was this?
Well, if we go back to Feb 28th, we saw very, very strong, very decisive strikes from the United States and Israel against Iranian targets. We saw the killing of Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, and we saw the coordinated attacks on key targets across the Islamic Republic. But anyone who's looked at this in any detail, anyone who's done any type of wargaming on this, will know that the likely scenario was that Iran would retaliate, and it would retaliate in ways that it was able to do so successfully. So it would look to hit US targets in and around the Middle East, so predominantly in the Persian Gulf. And that is exactly what has happened. And it beggars belief that the US and US officials did not see this coming, that there would be a concerted number of attacks on US bases across the Gulf and a volley of missiles sustained, targeted at Israel. We saw that last year, and we've seen that obviously over the past 100 days. So I think it was entirely predictable that this would be the response, that this was not going to be just limited to the United States, Israel, and Iran.
Just yesterday, the U.S. military hit Iranian radar sites after shooting down drones launched by Tehran towards the Strait of Hormuz. In retaliation, Iran targeted U.S. bases in Kuwait and Bahrain. Both countries issued harsh rebukes, demanding Iran to stop attacking its neighbors. Iran's Ministry of Foreign Affairs called the attacks a flagrant violation of the sovereignty of both countries, adding that such attacks threaten the security and stability of the Arabian Gulf region. The statement also stressed that security cannot be built with missiles and drones. From where you're sitting, do you think Iran's neighbors blame Tehran for what is happening on their territories, or is it more nuanced?
Yeah, I think there's a pretty clear blame game at play here. For example, we saw back in September 2025 an Iranian strike on Doha that was targeted at US bases there. And the Iranian argument was that, look, we are targeting the US. We are not targeting Qatar. We're not targeting our neighborly brothers. But that was not an argument that landed in Doha. The Qataris rejected this and said, look, this is our territory. And that is the same type of argument that is being put forward today by Iran and conversely being rejected by states across the Gulf. They are saying that this is a flagrant breach of their territorial sovereignty. And the Iranians, of course, then reject that and say, we are not targeting you, you are our neighbors. But you are hosting US bases and the US is committing strikes on our sovereign territory. So there's a discursive battle playing out here, a battle that doesn't necessarily have a very clear legal resolution. But again, it goes back to this curse of geography that these are states that have to live with one another. And because the Iranians are not able to hit the United States directly on US soil, they're having to hit US bases in and around the Gulf, which is then antagonizing relations with their own neighbors. So fundamentally, security cannot be achieved through missiles alone, as we are seeing right now. There has to be a diplomatic solution. But this is a question that's been going back for decades now. How do you get a diplomatic solution to feelings of insecurity in and around the Gulf when there have been so many wars, so many conflicts, and so much hostility and suspicion?
And I think one of the other specific questions to ask is, could it risk, that is, Iran, risk alienating regional neighbors whose support or neutrality it may ultimately need?
I think that ship has probably already sailed in the sense that there had been a great number of steps taken to improve diplomatic relations between Iran and the Gulf states. We saw that with the Saudi normalization with Iran back in 2023. We saw other states working more closely with the Iranians as a consequence of that. But what we've seen over the past year, perhaps, and especially over the past 100 days, is that a lot of that goodwill has been undone, and that the diplomatic cover that many had previously envisaged Saudi Arabia and others giving Iran in the context of this has dissipated. We saw Saudi Arabia as well condemning the attacks on Kuwait and Bahrain, suggesting that this is risking an even greater escalation. And so we are in this fundamental dilemma of how do you resolve a neighborhood that is cursed by geography of putting rivals, longtime rivals, next to one another amidst deep-seated animosity, hostility, and suspicion.
Simon, let's put aside for a second what the actual facts on the ground are. Each side is claiming the upper hand. I want you to listen to a message from Iran's new supreme leader, presented a few days ago by a cleric and politician, followed by the U.S. president.
The malicious enemy, having suffered defeat at the hands of your brave sons in the armed forces, and particularly as a result of facing a decisive blow both on the battlefield and in the streets, is experiencing a profound and meaningful humiliation.
They have a little ability. Their missiles are 82% gone, we estimate. Their capacity to build is very little right now because we hit all of their manufacturing areas. Same thing with drones, largely gone, but they still have a little capacity. Yeah, not much, but they have a little. Their Navy is completely gone. Their Air Force is completely gone.
Some are calling it a stalemate. At this stage, who's really winning this war?
Well, I think we're seeing a war, of course, but we're seeing two different types of war playing out here. The Iranians are playing a game where to win, they have to survive. And if they do survive this, if they come up the other side, then they will be able to tell the story of how they bested the powers of the United States and the Israelis and others. And that will be seen as a huge victory for them. For the Americans, of course, it's a different narrative. They're able to say we have destroyed X, Y, and Z of the Iranian infrastructural capacity and of its military. That is being disputed by different estimates coming out of the United States. Of course, the CIA is disputing some of the stuff that Donald Trump is saying. And given the huge disparity in power and military capabilities, and given the different goals that have been set out by Donald Trump, it's hard to see how he can get out of this in a way that is able to be spun as a victory. So I think we've got two different games going on within the context of this war. And that's what makes it even harder to actually try and get a resolution here, because they're playing on very, very different battlefields.
Simon, you're hinting at my next question. I mean, one of the striking elements of this war has been the battle over perception, social media campaigns, accusations of ceasefire violations, general efforts to shape international opinion. How important is the information war, you think, compared with the fighting itself?
I think it's hugely important. I think what we're seeing, because of the prevalence of social media, because of the prevalence of all of the different forms of coverage that we're seeing, from people on the ground across the Gulf to people who are in Iran and able to get out pictures and images through using VPNs, etc., we're seeing this war playing out in real time. And as a consequence, both sides that are involved, and the Israelis as well for that matter, are trying to spin it. It's a propaganda war as much as a battlefield war, about trying to spin the narrative of who is winning and who is losing. And that's where you see the Lego videos that are coming out from AI generated by the Iranians, which are so very powerful and point to a different type of narrative to the one that Donald Trump is spinning. So I think you've got a real discursive battle going on alongside the battle to control the Strait of Hormuz, alongside the diplomatic battle about what's going to happen to Iran's nuclear program, what about the highly enriched uranium. You've got lots of different playing fields where there are struggles and contestation playing out. And I think perception is hugely important here because it, in turn, can put pressure on the leaders involved in terms of making the decisions that they then need to make about diplomacy and about next steps.
You mentioned those Lego videos, satirical deepfakes, officials delivering lines using American pop culture vernacular, all to create the impression the U.S. leadership is frankly silly and that the war is unjust. U.S. public opinion is increasingly against this war, as I'm sure you're well aware. Is Iran, in fact, winning the information war?
Well, it's tricky to say. We don't have the right type of data to really analyze how effective these things are being. But if we're going by broad trends, we look at how popular the war is in the United States. And it was never very popular in the first place. Donald Trump won the election on a platform of no more, quote unquote, forever wars. And yet he finds himself embroiled seemingly in one now that he can't get himself out of, no matter how hard he's trying. And I think that the Iranian propaganda, the Lego videos, are proving to be incredibly important in exacerbating a lot of this anger, exacerbating a lot of this frustration that is being felt by Donald Trump. And also, on a personal level, I'm sure he's very frustrated that they are playing into some of the stereotypes that people are having about him. They're exacerbating those stereotypes. And it's proven to be very, very successful in shaping a narrative. How much that narrative then lands and sways public opinion, of course, is a different question and a much harder question to answer, but they're certainly very effective.
We know that domestic pressures, oil prices, upcoming midterm elections are weighing on this White House. How much does public sentiment inside Iran matter to its leaders? With reports of economic hardship, inflation, a general strain on the people, how much will that affect Tehran's willingness to negotiate a deal, you think?
Well, I think obviously it's hugely important. The economic issue is huge. We know that sanctions over the past few years have had a devastating impact on the Iranian economy, on the Iranian people. Let's not forget that earlier this year, there were mass protests on the streets of Iranian cities. We saw estimates that tens of thousands of people had been killed by the regime, which prompted Donald Trump to say help is on its way. Obviously, that was a slightly different way of framing what would later come. But I think if we go back to the attitudes of people in Iran, there had been a growing sense of frustration even before the situation now. The situation now is far, far worse than it was, obviously, back in January. The economic situation has deteriorated dramatically. And so people are struggling. People are suffering. We're hearing reports about the middle class being hollowed out, people losing businesses, people struggling to make their lives work for themselves and their family. So pressure is building. But at the same time, we've also got this sense that there is deep-seated anger at what the United States has done and deep-seated anger at what the Israelis have done. There's still a lot of support for the regime, for Mojtaba Khamenei, the new supreme leader, but we don't know how much opposition to Khamenei there is. And in part, that's because of the long-standing internet blackout that was in place. So again, it's quite difficult to tell, but there's no doubt that the economic situation is having a pretty damning impact on the people of Iran, on the Iranians themselves.
Simon, I'm curious about your perspective on this. Has this conflict reached the point where neither side is pursuing victory in the traditional sense, but instead trying to avoid being seen to lose? And if so, how does that change the prospects for a durable, robust settlement?
It's a really good question because I think victory looks to be very different for both sides. If we go back to what Donald Trump had been saying right at the start, victory was perhaps getting the quote-unquote nuclear dust out of Iran, about facilitating regime change. That was certainly a narrative being put forward by Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Now, those goalposts have moved. Now it's about reopening the Strait of Hormuz, which was open before the war, of course. Let's not forget that, and getting free passageway for transit. So that's a very, very different type of victory. Then there's the question about the nuclear program. What role does the nuclear program play in this for an American victory? Now, Donald Trump has repeatedly said Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. So I guess he's hung his hat on that one and said that is one of the red lines that we must adhere to. But there was already a nuclear deal in place that Donald Trump had withdrawn from. There were already deep negotiations playing out, and it looked like a deal was going to be reached back in February before this round of strikes. So again, there's the possibility of a victory there. But I think for the Iranians, it is about survival. If you can survive this, if you can survive 100 days of bombardment, of economic pressure, of blockades, then that itself feeds into the broader ideological narrative that is right at the heart of the Islamic Republic, of standing up, in their eyes at least, against oppressors. And this is a narrative that can then be turned and spun and used to justify its own position and to articulate this narrative that Iran won the conflict. So I think you've got very different types of victories, and those different types of victories mean that it's difficult to get a diplomatic resolution. But I think it's not impossible. There is a way of doing that if there can be a way of mitigating the different spoilers that are involved on all sides of this in the United States, within Iran, and within Israel, for that matter.
Simon, before I let you go, say this war does go on, and we're talking on day 200 rather than day 100, what outcome, of all the things you could consider, all the metrics, what outcome would make you say one side had genuinely won the war, especially the political war?
I think if Iran was able to continue to operate broadly in the way that it's doing, I mean, it's trying to say that it controls the Strait of Hormuz. It's trying to announce that it's letting certain ships through, certain ships are paying what it terms administrative fees rather than tolls. If it's able to continue doing that, then I think it's able to demonstrate that it's in a stronger position than it was previously when it didn't control the Strait of Hormuz, let's not forget. And so if it's able to do that, it's able to really stress that the rules of the game have started to shift in favor of Iran. Now, if the United States are able to reopen the straits fully, to clear all the mines out, and they're able to dissuade Iran from being able to interfere in global trade, then I think that's maybe a victory for the United States. But again, I think these are very, very difficult scenarios to foresee, given how precarious things are right now, and given that the absence of a sustained diplomatic off-ramp. We thought we had that through Pakistan. But again, that seems to have been diminishing as a consequence of the different perceptions, the different narratives, and the different spoilers that are involved in this conflict.
Simon Mabon, thank you so much.
Thank you.
So what are you seeing? Who's winning this war? At this stage, is that possible for either side? Share your thoughts. I'm Michael Oku. Thanks for joining us. Until next time.